Hello. Yes, but I kind of like doing the line from Rump Shaker for mic check in church. So I ran sound for the Haywood Banks concert and realized I should.
you love, we welcome you.
Morning, y'all.
Good morning.
It's good to be with you again this morning. I want to remind you that we've got these nifty cards in your pews. And if you are a visitor, we have a yellow card you can fill out here and let us know how to contact you. And if you want any further information about our church, you can check out the pews or ask somebody around you. I'm Phil, Bart Thomas, and I'll let Tim say his speech.
Thank you. I'm Tim. I'm the senior minister at First Unitarian Church of Toledo, and I want to add to Phil's welcome to you here in the sanctuary and to our online audience watching on our Toledo Unitarians YouTube channel. And the other thing to add is if you're here and you have a telephone that rings, make sure it's set so it won't ring. And that might help us a little bit too. Thank you so much. I open with things that we hold closely, whether it's through life, through the week, or something immediate. Today, on our minds, in our hearts, and with our spirits, there are people in our circles who, with their family and friends, have challenges of life and death, health and illness, home and travel, financial security, and monetary stress. And that's not just for individuals and families, but for organizations we're a part of, including this congregation, and of course, government and our economic systems. Decisions are being made by ourselves and others on how we can live our best lives, which sometimes means aspiring to that and realizing we have moves yet to make to reach aims and goals. We want to live and be in comfort, and we don't always reach that goal. And individual and family ways go on with new lives born and many other joys and celebrations. May we be compassionate to all as we don't know what other people are going through. So treat one another well, giving dignity and compassion. And may we be glad for their celebrations and ours. Also, something many of us are holding closely is the federal indictment of the 45th President of the United States. May the process be clear. The courts have order. The judgment be just. And may we not feel too bad about having some attitudes of entertainment about his finally facing legal consequences. We also have on our minds, in our hearts, with our spirits, the fact that there is war in our world. There is disaster by nature and disaster caused by humans. And this week, we had to start paying attention to the air quality index. And when I checked at 9:40 this morning, where we are has a moderate air quality of 65, meaning the air quality is acceptable. However, there may be a risk for some people, particularly those who are unusually sensitive to air pollution. Also, we know that inequality, inequity, and racism are in our societies, and we can do our own parts not to oppress, to celebrate many cultures, to grow in self and universally. One reason we join in religious gatherings is to realize common links. The uncommon is here too. Let's be together in faith, hope, and love, physically and in spirit.
Our opening words this morning are the Prayer of the War Atheist by Jessica Purple Rodela. I pray that we may not be fooled by the lure of a violent cure. Let us instead reach toward healing. Let us resolve to heal the world, to teach the world, and wield only the sword of truth. Let us arm ourselves with satyagraha. Satyagraha, Gandhi's word for his steady, assertive, nonviolent rebellion. Satyagraha, meaning soul force. Satyagraha defeats our fears. Satyagraha reclaims our courage. Satyagraha encourages our certainty. Satyagraha informs our hopes. My prayer today is for Satyagraha.
And as Phil lights our chalice, I bring these words by Aisha Hauser and Susan Lawrence. We are Unitarian Universalists with minds that think, hearts that love, and hands that are ready to serve. Together we care for our earth and work for friendship and peace in our world. And now, as I turn this page, please join me in reciting the covenant of our congregation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And our opening hymn is number 145, As Tranquil Streams, and words will be on the screen as well as in your gray hymnal. Please stand if you will.
As tranquil streams that meet and merge and flow as one to seek the sea, our kindred hearts and minds unite to build a church that shall be free. Free from the bonds that bind the mind to narrow thought and lifeless free. Free from the social conflicts to serve the cause of humanity. A freedom that renews the pledge, the trust, the longing future. It is the soul that future and its spirit. Prophetic church, the future waits, Lord, let our waiting ministry go forward in the love of God, proclaim the truth that makes us free.
Good morning. No offense intended to Phil. And Reverend Tim. Yeah. But we are here today to talk about worry. And people like to say that kids should not feel worry. Because what do they have to worry about? They don't have a job. They don't have the responsibility of keeping other people safe. And that's true. And it also doesn't help at all in trying not to worry. When I was a kid, I worried all the time. And I think that's normal for children. I worried about, what if my best friend starts to hate me? What if I get a bad grade? What if our country goes to war? What if my family moves and I have to start a new school? What if I have a heart attack? What if my parents get divorced? And grown-ups will say that kids shouldn't worry about those things because they're very unlikely to happen, or maybe if they do happen, it's really not that big a deal. But that is not helpful advice. In your life, if a thing is important to you, then it is important. You are the one who decides that. And science tells us that we have a tendency to worry more about things that are unlikely to happen, like a shark attack, than we are about things that are more likely to happen, like, and this is true, being attacked by a cow. So, our brains supply us with plenty of things to worry about. Our brains are not as good at calming us down. Brain's job is to keep you alive. It's not to keep you calm. So we have to tell brain how to calm down. And the first thing I like to do, the first thing I try, is just a technique called wait to worry. And that just means you don't go through feeling the bad feelings until it's time. Worrying about making a bad grade doesn't make you get a good grade. Worrying about having a heart attack doesn't make you any healthier. The only thing that is make you feel bad. So try to wait to worry. You probably will get a good grade, or at least an okay grade, and you will have not spent any time making yourself feel bad for no reason. A lot of the time, the bad thing doesn't happen. But what if the bad thing does happen? Our country could go to war. You could move and have to start at a new school. Instead of worrying about the bad things before they happen, try telling yourself this: if the bad thing happens, I will handle it. I am smart, I am sensible, I am as capable as anyone else of handling bad things. Some of these bad things happened to me when I was a kid. I got a bad grade or two, my parents got divorced, I had to move to a new state and start new schools. When those bad things happened, that was the time to feel all those hard feelings. And I felt them. I cried, I had trouble sleeping, I got mad. And then the more time that passed after the bad thing happened, the less those bad feelings kept bothering me. And that is handling it. And I was okay. One easy trick that I like to cut off your brain's worry cycle is a technique called square breathing. Square breathing is a trick that forces your heart to slow down and makes your brain turn itself into more of a rest mode. And here's how you do it. You slowly breathe in while you count to 4, hold that breath while you count to 4, slowly breathe out while you count to 4, and then count to 4 before you breathe in again, if you can. So let's practice it right now. Ready? In, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. When you do that, your body tells your brain, whoa, we're safe here, we're going to need you to calm down. So when your brain tells you it's time to get scared, it's time to get worried, you can do a quick check. Just think, okay, I'm not being attacked by a cow right now. Worrying isn't going to help me accomplish anything right this minute. If the bad thing happens, I will handle it. So brain, it is time for you to calm down. I'm going to do some square breathing and you're going to relax. And when you do that, over the years and with enough practice, you can get pretty good at not feeling those bad feelings, especially about things that don't ever happen. Thank you.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin in me. Let there be peace on earth, and peace that was meant to be with God as our Father. Brothers all are we. Let me walk with my brother in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me, and let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin in me. With God as our Father, family all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin in me. And let it begin in me.
Now let's have a time of meditation, contemplation, and prayer. With these words by Mohandas Gandhi, it is possible to live in peace. If someone with courage and vision can rise to lead in nonviolent action, the winter of despair can, in the twinkling of an eye, be turned into the summer of hope. It is possible to live in peace. Nonviolence is not a garment to put on and off at will. Its seat is in the heart, and it must be an inseparable part of our being. It is possible to live in peace. Nonviolence, which is a quality of the heart, cannot come by an appeal to the brain. It is a plant of slow growth, growing imperceptibly but surely. It is possible to live in peace. If a single person achieves the highest kind of love, it will be sufficient to neutralize the hate of millions. It is possible to live in peace. If we are to reach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children. It is possible to live in peace. The future depends on what we do in the present. It is possible to live in peace. Let's observe 1 minute of silence.
Spirit of light, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
These words are in the Declaration of Sentiments adopted by the Peace Convention of Boston in 1838, published in the Liberator, William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist newspaper. We expect to prevail through the foolishness of preaching.
And with the foolishness of preaching, we get to our sermon time today, which is going to be a conversation with Phil Park Thomas. A few weeks ago, I asked Phil if there was a topic that he might want to talk about during the sermon time in a Sunday service. And Phil, you said nonviolence. Of course, we're familiar with the teachings of Mohandas Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., the nonviolent practices during India's reclamation of its country from British rule, and the nonviolence in the U.S. civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. But you're going beyond these leaders and times to bring in Gene Sharp and speak of nonviolent resistance in today's world. Though Gene Sharp was active 50 years ago, his work is still influential. Tell me a bit about Gene Sharp's influence and importance to the concept of nonviolent resistance.
Well, his writings are still active, and in fact, one of his last works was From Dictatorship to Democracy, and it was used as the blueprint for the Arab Spring. of 2006 to 2008. And for us personally, I would say he has much to say about the nature and use of political power, not only in wider society, but in our interpersonal relationships. And he also offers hope in the face of overwhelming corporate and government power.
Now, I don't expect this to be an academic discussion on a Sunday morning in the 11 o'clock hour. This is in liberal religious context. And I hope there are messages we can take from this talk for our own use. So we will be looking for the message, but at the same time, I know that you have read and worked a lot in the area of nonviolence. So you might have some deeper things to tell us as well. But first, early on, there's a particular biographical item about Gene Sharp that's relevant to Northwest Ohio. Tell me about that.
He was born in North Baltimore, Ohio, just south of Toledo, down in Wood County. And I lived in North Baltimore for 4 years. Though during those 4 years, I could not locate the actual house where he'd been born in. But you can find still references to his family in some of the older papers. They used to have a newspaper down in North Baltimore. They don't anymore. And his father was an itinerant preacher, and I'm not clear what his mother did, but they lived in North Baltimore for several years, and then they moved on. He died in Boston, Massachusetts, just in 2018.
Okay. So why have nonviolence as the focus of a religious service? Is there something different for Sunday at 11 than there would be for a session on nonviolence in our spiritual forum or an evening workshop?
Well, certainly there's a lot more that could be done in a spiritual forum or an evening workshop, but I think for this morning also, we have some things to consider. One is that we repeat every Sunday in this church, love is the doctrine of this church. And if we're serious about that, then we want to understand about how our relationships with one another, how power is expressed and used between us. Sometimes it's very unconscious. And by the way, when I use the word power, I'm not talking about some kind of mystical energy or anything like that. It's basically how we either defer to other people or we get people to defer to us. And this is part of human relationships. We do it all the time. As parents, we exert a certain amount of power over our children, at least until they're about 2 years old, and again, when they hit 14. But that's all testing out our own autonomy, and as we grow older, as children grow into adults, we test our power with other people. We accept the power of teachers to a certain extent until, and unfortunately in some cases, that teacher may violate our trust. Other kinds of leaders we give power to, so to speak. Examining how those power relationships function among us, just as human beings, is relevant to us, even in the context of worship. We're doing it this morning. This is why you are all not just engaged in numerous conversations at this moment. You're listening to Tim and I having this conversation. There is a power relationship going on at this point. Whether it's misused or used properly, that is an ethical question. Ethics is certainly an appropriate conversation for the church in worship. We also, as we get back to that subject about love is the doctrine of this church, how do we balance our relationships in such a way that love is expressed in its purest, most healing form among us? So nonviolence is applicable to that conversation. When we think about nonviolent action, for instance, in the political sphere, we're asking, how do we transform our ethical stance, our ethical person, our loving person into that process? When we're talking about not only just doing nonviolence as a means for social change, what are we doing to our interior person in terms of living nonviolently within as well?
So you talked about power and struggle, but early in our conversation, we probably ought to get to some type of definition. Tell me what nonviolence is. Is there a context for the presence of weapons with nonviolence? And what about the concept that for some people, their connotation, their perception of nonviolence, which gets to power and advantage again, means roll over and get beat up?
Well, you asked quite a few interesting questions there. Let me go back to one of the struggles we have with the word nonviolence is that it's defining itself against what tends to be a cultural norm, which is violence. Uh, Violence, of course, expresses itself in numerous ways. Uh, we we all think about things like school shootings and things like that. We think about war, but poverty is a form of violence as well. And how do we address that? Nonviolence, though, is not always the best word, but we haven't got much in our English language to respond to it in, because we're defining it against the prevalence of violence in our society. Perhaps Gandhi has given us a term that we don't use as often as we should, that is satyagraha, which can be translated as soul or truth force. The idea that there's an alternative way of speaking and relating to people and doing things and even accomplishing social change. Now, you ask about rolling over. No, nonviolence is not passive. Uh, this is going to be a confusing word for me to use, but it can be aggressive in the sense that if you are actually living in a nonviolent ethos, nonviolent values, then you're not going to roll over when someone is trying to be a bully. You will speak truth to power. You will speak truth to power. And sometimes that is a dangerous, threatening thing to those who are trying to hold on illegitimately to power or holding on to power in illegitimate ways, which tends to happen with governments, tends to happen with large corporations, tends to happen in many spheres of human relationships.
And you've told me that nonviolence is a means primarily by which we rebalance power in a society. And rebalancing power can't be easy. And an example that I had is look at the Ohio State House, with conservatives ending August elections, and then only because it might benefit them in their exercise of power, imposing an August election this year on a constitutional provision. And with the separation of church and state, we in the Unitarian Universalist Church, we in this setting, we cannot support people, but we can take positions. So let me urge all who can vote to take part in that August election and vote no.
And you've actually raised one way of practicing nonviolence, and that is going to the ballot.
Yeah. And that was leading to the question, are there practical moves we who want to live the nonviolent way can make when we're confronted by misused political power?
First, speak truthfully, honestly, and directly. I think that also guided by go right back to what we say every Sunday, love is a doctrine of this church. We learn to speak, and it is a challenge sometimes, to speak the truth in love as well. And what that is, and that doesn't mean we're sentimental about it. It means that we are sensitive that the other person, even our opponent, has feelings. Some of them may be legitimate, some of them may not. We don't know the other person's whole back history, for example, as to why they take the position that they do. Um, realize that people can't read us any better than we can read them. And so we have to give a chance to also listen to them, which doesn't mean that we have to agree with them. For a few years, I worked in the Oklahoma courts as a certified mediator. I was certified by the Oklahoma Supreme Court, in fact, to do mediation in the small claims courts. One of the things that I had to do when I sat down with people, what two parties that were arguing with each other said, I'm going to listen to you both. And sometimes we add baggage onto that word listen. Oh, you're going to agree with the other guy. No, it doesn't mean I'm going to agree or disagree. I'm going to listen to and hear what you have to say and take it seriously. That is how we take in our everyday relationships the practice of listening to the other person, whether we are going to agree with them or not. That is a judgment for later. What we need to do is hear what they're saying and why they're saying it.
Yeah.
That is the beginning of a practice of nonviolence in our everyday relationships, not just in court mediation, but in other spheres of life as well. If we're taking other people seriously, then we will want to step back from sometimes that urge to beat them, if not physically, verbally, or in the contest of ideas. One of the things that I have a strange hobby. I listen to debates. And a lot of people don't know how to debate. Rather than putting your ideas out there for people to hear and to listen and to act, sometimes it's to get one over on top of each other. That is not always real helpful. That's what our society often encourages. If we can set aside the urge to win against someone else and instead come to a place between the two of us that is the best win for each of us, then we are also practicing non-violence, satyagraha, in its best way in our relationship. Sometimes it's a lot of work to get there because you've got somebody that just wants to stomp all over you. You don't have to let them stomp on you to speak your truth.
You had said that we don't always know people's backstories, and in Unitarian Universalism, many of us have come from different traditions, religious traditions, having found Unitarian Universalism in our adulthood or sometime later in life. I know that you have a background in the Society of Friends in Quakerism, and the Quakers have peaceful action as a tenet, and they're kind of an ideal that we look to when we talk about nonviolence and religion is, well, look at the Quakers. Did the Quakers get it right? Is there more work to do than the Quakers have developed?
I think even Quakers got a lot more work to do. They're human.
Yeah.
Just to, I don't want to be pedantic about this, but the Quakers were not really identified as a pacifist group until about 1660, 1661, after the end of the whole Civil War and Revolution and the restoration of the monarchy. And George Fox had to submit a letter to the king stating he was not going to engage in violent revolution against the king who had just been reinstated in England. That is the first real public statement that the Quakers had. Not all Quakers are pacifists. There are some Quakers who have participated in war because that is what their conscience told them they had to do.
Mhm.
This was particularly true like in the Second World War, where some Quakers took up arms because Hitler was such a threat that, again, there's that dilemma. At what point do you let the abuse of power roll over you? Other Quakers abstained from that war as well on the basis of conscience. So we're getting down to the question of conscience itself, and how do we value our conscience and the conscience of others? The Quaker pacifism and nonviolence are related, but they're not always the same thing. You could have most pacifists advocate nonviolence, but many of the people that have spoken out in favor of nonviolence were not absolutely pacifists. It may surprise many people that Gandhi was not a pacifist till toward the end of his life, but he was a pragmatist, and he realized that if he was going to challenge the authority of Great Britain in India, Great Britain had all the weapons, had the armies, had all the infrastructure. Gandhi had to rely on numbers. And so he motivated numbers of people to participate in resistance to that power. And this is where we get down to that question of the rebalancing power, because what he did is he helped empower Indians to reclaim their natural power. In other words, they said, we're not going to cooperate with this system anymore. And eventually, it took him 50 years. He writes in several of his letters and his writings about you need to have patience if you're going to engage in nonviolent social change. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It may be the day after tomorrow or whatever. You're in it for the long haul if you're going to change. If you're going to change society, even the society we're living in, you're not going to get a change like that. Sometimes it may not even happen in our own lifetime, but we have to be in it for the long haul. Nonviolence has to be persistent, and it has to be lived. It has to be in the way in which we even talk with one another in our community and in our families. I know of situations where people have talked about, for instance, years ago, I also worked in an emergency room. I was a social worker, and I was dealing mainly with cases of domestic violence and substance abuse and getting those people into the pipeline, which means that I did all the intervention work and then got them assigned to a caseworker to follow up on them. And I'm not going to say too many details because I want to still, even after nearly 40 years, I want to respect some confidentiality. But we had one person that was brought in who had spoken about how you treat one another. And this was a public figure in the community. Unfortunately, this person had hit his child enough times to come into the emergency room. We need to be consistent. Follow that consistency even to the point where we measure what we say and how we say it to other people. This is something I'm constantly learning myself.
Mhm.
Nonviolence is not something that I have achieved. It is something that I'm continually working on as an ideal in my life. And if you work with me long enough, you're going to catch me on something when I'll say something or do something that will strike you and say, well, that doesn't seem consistent. I am a work in process. And one of the things about adopting an ethic of nonviolence as a lifestyle is to recognize that we are all works in process.
I want to bring up one other religious leader who is associated with nonviolence, and that is the Dalai Lama of Tibet. In the foreword to a book by Mark Kurlansky titled Nonviolence, 25 Lessons from the History of a Dangerous Idea, the Dalai Lama wrote the foreword. And he spoke about a term important in our own Unitarian Universalism and multi-faith work, compassion. Here's what he wrote. I think it is important to acknowledge here that nonviolence does not mean the mere absence of violence. It is something more positive, more meaningful than that. The true expression of nonviolence is compassion, which is not just a passive emotional response, but a rational stimulus to action. And you talked about passivity. He also said responding to violence with more violence is rarely appropriate. Rarely. He didn't say never. However, discussing nonviolence when things are going smoothly does not carry much weight. It's precisely when things become really difficult, urgent, and critical that we should think and act with nonviolence, he said. So, is there a way we can make nonviolence a more permanent part of the conversation and an approach all the time and not just something to think about when we're confronted with some need to resist, some bad expression of power?
I think we need to learn to examine the power relationships in our lives. That's a place to start.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we need to look at how things we say and things that we do and things that we participate in contribute to violence. You raised the question about was violence ever necessary? Unfortunately, we live in an imperfect world. Even George Fox, founder of Quakerism, and he himself abhorred war,
Mm-hmm.
said that there was a role for what he called the sword of the magistrate. In other words, that there was a time when you have to choose between appropriate force, violent force, and what's not, and that was always a murky area. But by that he said, you're going to need police. That's a reality.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to put up with police abuse, but you do need police to keep order in society. If you are going someplace and you come across someone who has a victim with a knife at their throat and they're getting ready to rob and hurt the person, are you going to stand there and have a nonviolent sit down, for example? That is not an appropriate response. Your first response should be to get that knife away from that person's throat.
Mm-hmm.
That may require, unfortunately, a violent act. I don't know whether you want to shoot the person or put on your high karate aftershave lotion and put the person out of commission, whatever is necessary. But you have a choice you have to make there. And these choices do happen from time to time.
Just say please is a magic word.
You can, but I'm not so sure how the mind frame of someone who's holding a knife to someone else's throat is going to respond to the word please.
Right. So nonviolent action has happened in peace and anti-war movements, in asserting civil rights, in community reactions to local crime, and in other ways. Too often, anti-violence is not seen as an everyday practice. Some might say discipline. But in reaction to something extreme, as I'd already said, You've already given a couple of tips. Any further tips on how to make it a regular part of our practice of living and especially of our Unitarian Universalist religious practice?
I think we need to step back from the part of our culture that worships violence.
Mm-hmm.
Violent behavior, violent values are, for lack of a better word, kind of an idol.
Mm-hmm.
And look at the amount of entertainment that is centered on violence. Might suggest reading the works of the late theologian Walter Wink, who talks about the myth of redemptive violence. In other words, that one violence triumphs over another. The problem when we are passively drinking from the well of violence, so to speak, is that we don't notice how that infects a lot of our thinking. And we need to step back and say, how is the way in which I am talking to this person causing unnecessary harm?
Mm-hmm.
Words can be as harmful as a stick, sword, or a gun. The wounds appear differently. It's only been in the last maybe some 30 years that professionals working with the subject of domestic violence have started to acknowledge that verbal violence is as bad as physical violence. And certainly in our political discourse in this country, that threat of violence runs very close to the surface. Even in our national mythos, what do we do when we go to a sporting event? We stand up. I know this is maybe kind of controversial with some folks, but me saying this. But the Star Spangled Banner is a celebration of victorious violence.
Mm-hmm.
The flag waves, even though the bombs bursting in the air and all that. We hold up, yes, on one hand, the flag is kind of a passive symbol, but on the other hand, there are people who will knock your chops off over that
Yeah.
flag as well.
Yeah.
We encourage that kind of thinking in this country. We need, as Unitarians, to step back and say, wait a minute, is this healthy? Is this necessary? Is this creating the kind of society that we all need?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, Phil, thanks for sitting and having a sermonic, homiletic discussion about nonviolence. The conversation could go on, but we don't want the religious service to go on this much longer. So we're at a point, I'm going to ask one final question, and for this one, I'm going to get a little bit cosmic. Will and Ariel Durant, in their book, The Lessons of History, have a telling sentence about human nature. They wrote, "We may make contact with ambitious species on other planets or stars. Soon thereafter, there will be interplanetary war. Then and only then will we have this Earth be one. Do you see a way not to wait until then and only then for Earth to be one?"
you ask a hard question. Um, if we don't begin now, it will never happen. And human nature is capricious enough that I doubt utopia will ever arrive, just to be a realist.
Mhm.
But a better society will never arrive if we remain pessimistic and say, we can't get there, so why work toward it? I think we need to at least work toward the ideal, always.
Thank you. So be it. Let's move to the offering.
All right, this is the offering time. And you'll notice that you can give at utoledo.org and click on the Give and Online Giving. And you can mail your check here to the church at the First Unitarian Church of Toledo at 2205 Glendale Avenue in Toledo, 43614. Or we don't pass the plate here, but we encourage you not to pass the plate in the back. So if you're not giving the other ways, you can drop in your offering on your way out. And we thank you for your support of the work of this congregation. It not only helps keep the lights on, it helps keep our staff working, keeps a variety of programs available, and keeps us serving you and the community around. Thank you very much for your offering and support.
And our offertory hymn, the congregation is invited to sing number 1010 in the teal hymnal. The words will also be on the screen. We give thanks, and we'll sing it through about 3 times.
We give thanks for this precious day, for gathered here and far away, for this time we share, and this love we give. We give thanks for this precious day. Give thanks for this precious day, for gathered and this far away, for this time we share, with love we give thanks for this precious day. For this precious day.
Now it's time for our preview of coming attractions, coming soon. At 9:45 a.m., a week from today, Sunday, June 18th, it will be the beginning of our summer spiritual forum concept. We're calling it the Summer Chill Out Series. And it's going to be coffee and conversation, mingle and chat. And Sandra?
Actually, we've changed it. It's going to be talking about general assembly.
Okay, never mind. Next Sunday, Sandra Kozak-Sills, the president of our congregation, who will be a delegate to General Assembly, but will be delegating from Toledo online, will talk about General Assembly. General Assembly starts on Wednesday, the 21st, I think it is. So it will begin during the week after she gives us the preview. A few of us will be at General Assembly in Pittsburgh. Jenny Gottman will be there. I will be there with Jewel, and Phil Park Thomas will be there. So we will be represented in Pittsburgh as well. So we'll have that. And then in another week or so I'd better add. We will start the Summer Chill Out series. And then the 11 a.m. service next week, June 18th, we'll have our commissioned lay minister, David Strickler, preaching Honoring Father's Day, Standing Up for Trans Youth.
And from 6 to 8 p.m. this Tuesday, June 13th, the Backyard Garden Family Food and Fun. I don't know what a backyard garden family does, but anyone have any details on that?
So come and find out. You will get a free walking taco.
Tacos.
Yes.
All right. How can you turn down tacos? All right. And also from 6 to 8 p.m. on Thursday, June 15th, is the Intergenerational Multi-Faith Summer Series and Woody Troutman Multi-Faith Lecture. Whew, that's a mouthful. Featuring Marilyn Wood, who's a nurse PhD, who will speak on lead levels in children and adolescents, an issue that has been a long concern to our city. And immediately after today's service is coffee hour and social time. And our closing words from the great lesson by Olympia Brown. We can never make the world safe by fighting. Every nation must learn that the people of all nations are children of God and must share the wealth of the world. You may say this is impracticable, far away, can never be accomplished, but is the work we are appointed to do. Sometime, somehow, somewhere, we must ever teach this great lesson.
And as we send the flame into the community, we know that fire is good for warmth, for comfort, for preparation of food. When its context is firepower, however, may we approach the concern with ways of nonviolence. And our postlude, which you're invited to sing, is number 1054 in the Teal hymnal, and words will be on screen. Let this be a house of peace, and it will be only verses 1 and 3.
Let this be a house of peace, of nature and humanity, sorrow and elation. Let this be our house, a haven for the healing, an open room for questions and none inspiration. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let in this house see truth, where scientists and mystics abide in reverence here. Okay. Let this be our house, a house of our creation, where works of art and melodies consecrate the atmosphere. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace.
hearing my dad have all these discussions with his